Hello. So what are we going to learn in this course? Well, Excel analysis, even at a basic level, has a certain workflow. You get the data, so whether it's from Excel or another source. You potentially refine it by adding additional columns if needed, by creating formulas, maybe joining sets of data together, and then you visualize it, you analyze it. In this course, we're going to start off with the visualizing the data. So it's all very well at the advanced level, getting the data and adding the modeling, or as I like to call it, transforming the data. But really, the end result is you want to be able to do your analysis. It's really no good spending, let's say, 10 hours in a course doing the more advanced getting data and advanced add modeling, and not concentrating on the ability to visualize, to analyze the data. So in part one, I'm going to skip this step as much as possible. So we're going to have a workbook and instantly create our first pivot table. We're also going to create our first pivot chart, and we're going to go into a lot of depths and really explore what pivot tables can do. For example, this is the answer to practice activity 8, and you will be creating this pivot table by taking only the first month of a particular year, getting the average price, expressing it in thousands, and adding a data bar so you can visualize where the peaks are and so forth. We could refine that by then seeing what the difference is year on year. All of this using a pivot table. There aren't any formulas that you can see, and there aren't any formulas in the source data. So we'll be doing plenty of practice activities as we go along, so you can be really sure you're getting to grips with all of the advanced functions of pivot tables, the stuff that most people don't know about. After that, part 2 is all about getting the data. And get data is a bit more complicated than it sounds. It really allows us to refine the data, to create a structure of the data, but a lot more. For example, suppose I didn't just want to use a single data source. Perhaps I've got lots of data sources. Perhaps I've got an entire folder with subfolders full of data. So previously, what I would have to do is load each of these data sets in Excel, and then when a new one came along, I would have to load it as well. But I don't have to do that. What I can do instead is load everything from a folder. So I'll put this folder in, and I will then transform the data. So I'm going to get rid of all of these desktop innies, for instance, and I'm going to expand all of the data, combine it together, and then I'm going to take out the .csv in the month. So I'll go into replace values, .csv, replace with nothing, and then I'll get and load the data, which I can then use as a table, such as here, or I can create my own pivot tables. So I no longer have to do anything in terms of combining the data. And if the data gets updated, let's just duplicate this April data, for instance, then all I've got to do is click refresh, and I have the new data instantly there at my fingertips. The third part of this course is all about adding modeling. So this optional step, maybe you've got multiple tables that you need to join together, or maybe you need to refine your analysis by adding additional columns and measures. For example, here we have a pivot table where the data has been taken from two separate tables. We have the ability to get fields from one table and another, and the way we connect them is using the Power Pivot or the data model. So we can connect tables together and add more measures and formulas should we so wish. And we'll be doing this in part 3 of our course. Now, you may have noticed that there are things written underneath all of these Power Pivots and Power Query sections, and these are the languages we'll be using. In part 2, we'll be using a language called M for mashup, and in part 3, we'll be using a formula system called DAX. Data Analysis Expressions. If you're used to Excel, DAX formulas will be fairly similar to start with, and then we'll have a lot more formulas. M formulas a slightly bit more removed, but not by much. So what exactly are we going to learn? Well, I'm going to leave that to Microsoft. Microsoft are the experts in Excel, obviously, and they used to have an exam, 70-779, analysing and visualising data with Microsoft Excel. Now, as of the 28th of February 2020, Microsoft announced that this exam is going to retire as of the 30th of June 2020. However, it's the content, the skills measured, that is really what I'm interested in, because the content takes us into the details of get and transform, Power Pivot, and pivot tables. So in this course, what we'll be doing is looking at pivot tables and pivot charts and its hidden depth. So that's part 1, and you'll be amazed how easy some of the hidden depth is. In part 2, we'll be looking at connecting to data sources, performing transformation and cleansing data. And then in part 3, we'll be looking at creating and optimizing data models and creating calculated columns and measures. And there are plenty of practice activities as we go along so that you can be sure that you are learning, because you'll be watching how to do it and then actually doing it. By the end of this course, you'll hopefully have such a higher level of proficiency in Excel, both in intelligently getting the data, expanding it, and analysing it. Right, in the next lecture, you can download the resources that we'll be using in this course, which include the source data that we'll be using. And then we'll start with part 1, all about pivot tables.